At my cousin's engagement party in the house my parents' money paid for, my aunt raised her glass and said, "Family is everything. Whatever we had, we shared. Nobody in this family ever went without." And I set down my drink and said, "Tia, before you finish that toast, I've spent the last year with a forensic accountant going through the trust you managed for me, the one you always said the market destroyed." The room went quiet. It wasn't the market. Let me back up. Because to understand why a 38-year-old woman hired a forensic accountant to audit a trust that had supposedly been empty for 2 decades, you have to understand what it is to grow up poor inside a lie. To be raised on scarcity by the people spending your money. To be taught every single day that you should be grateful. My name is Camille Osei. I'm 38 years old, and when I was 14, my parents died and left me a trust worth over $400,000. My aunt was the trustee. And for the next 4 years, she told me the market had destroyed it, that my inheritance had simply evaporated in bad investments, that there was nothing left, that I'd have to make my own way. I believed her for 24 years. This is the story of the year I stopped believing her and what the numbers actually said. Let me tell you about my parents, because everything begins with the fact that they planned well. My father was a pharmacist. My mother taught high school chemistry. They were not wealthy people, but they were careful, deliberate people. The kind who read the fine print, who took the meeting with the financial planner, who understood that love without provision is just sentiment. And they had one child, me, and they had made arrangements, because that's what people like my parents do. They died together in a car accident on a wet road when I was 14 years old. And they left behind, among other things, an estate. Life insurance policies on both of them, the equity in their home, their savings, my father's retirement accounts. Consolidated, it came to somewhere north of $400,000. And it was placed, exactly as they'd intended, in a trust for me, to be managed until I was old enough to receive it, and used in the meantime for my care, my education, my upbringing. The trustee was my father's sister, my Aunt Adjora. I want to be fair and describe her as I saw her then. Adjora took me in when I had nowhere else. She gave me a bedroom in her house. She fed me. And for that, I was told, constantly, by everyone, including myself, that I owed her everything. She was the aunt who'd stepped up, the good sister, the woman who'd taken in her brother's orphan, and she robbed me for 4 years while I said thank you. Here's how it worked, and I want to explain why it was clever than a simple theft. Adjora never denied the trust existed. That's the crucial difference between what happened to me and what happens to a lot of stolen children. She couldn't deny it. There'd been a probate, there were lawyers, there was paperwork. The whole family knew my parents had left money. Denying it would have been absurd. So she didn't deny it. She just lost it. The story she told, starting when I was about 15, was that the trust had been invested, as trusts are, and that the investments had gone badly. Terribly, in fact. She'd talk about it with a kind of pained regret, this thing that had happened to us. The market had turned. The advisor had made mistakes. There'd been losses. And each year the story got a little worse, until by the time I was 17 and starting to think about college, the message was clear and settled. The money my parents left me was essentially gone. Lost. Vanished into the market's cruelty. Nobody's fault, exactly. Just bad luck. And I believed her because I was 15, and then 16, and then 17, and I had absolutely no framework for understanding investments or trusts or fiduciary duty. I knew that markets went down sometimes. I knew grown-ups talked about crashes. It never once occurred to me to ask for a statement, because I didn't know statements existed. I didn't know a trustee had a legal obligation to account to the beneficiary. I didn't know that the market lost it is a claim that can be checked, line by line, against actual records. I was a grieving child and she was the adult, and she said the money was gone, and so the money was gone. Let me tell you what that did to my life, because this is the emotional core, and it's the part that has no dollar value. I grew up in scarcity. Not poverty exactly, Adjora's house was fine, but I grew up as the charity case in it. I was the one who couldn't have things. My cousins, Adjora's 2 kids, had what they needed and more. I had what was left. I wore hand-me-downs. I didn't do the activities that cost money. I learned to not ask, because asking made Adjora sigh in a particular way that meant you understand we're doing our best for you. Don't make it harder. And I was grateful. God, I was grateful. That's what makes me angriest now, 24 years later. I spent my adolescence in a state of active, effortful gratitude toward a woman who was spending my dead parents' money on her own children while teaching me that I was a burden being generously absorbed. Let me give you one memory, because one is worth more than a general description of a decade. When I was 16, there was a school trip. Science trip, 5 days, a university lab program, exactly the kind of thing the daughter of a pharmacist and a chemistry teacher would have gone to. It cost $600. A chemistry teacher pulled me aside specifically to tell me she thought I should go, that she'd recommend me, that I was good at this. I remember the specific feeling of being seen. It was the first time since my parents died that an adult had told me I was good at something they'd been good at. I brought the form home. I was so nervous I practiced asking. And Adjora looked at the form for a long moment and did the sigh, the particular one, the one that meant you understand we're doing our best for you, and said, "Camille, $600. Do you know what things cost? I have 2 children of my own and I've got you as well, and there's no money for extras. I'm sorry, sweetheart, that's just the reality." And I said okay. I said okay, and I threw the form away, and I told my teacher my aunt needed me at home that week, because I was too ashamed to say we couldn't afford it. And I remember lying in bed that night working very hard at not being resentful, because being resentful would have made me exactly the ungrateful burden I was terrified of being. I actually lay there and did the work of talking myself into gratitude. She took me in. She didn't have to. $600 is a lot of money. Don't be selfish, Camille. That same year, I know this now, from Desmond's reconstruction, because he dated everything, Ajora withdrew $11,000 from my trust, and my cousin went to a summer program. I remember waving her off. I remember being happy for her, genuinely, because I loved her and still do. $600. There was $400,000 sitting in an account with my name on it, and I couldn't have $600, and I lay in bed at 16 teaching myself not to resent the woman who was spending it. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just accounting. The theft I can put a number on, but there's no number for the 16-year-old girl who threw away the form and lied to her teacher and worked so hard at being grateful. I went to college on loans and work, all of it. Jorah told me there was nothing to help with, and I believed her, and I signed the papers at 18 that would take me 15 years to pay off. I worked through school. I graduated with debt that shaped the next decade and a half of my life. What jobs I could take, when I could move, whether I could buy anything, how long I waited to start my own life. And the whole time, I believed my parents, my careful, deliberate, plan-ahead parents, had somehow failed to provide for me. That was the second theft, and I've come to think it was the worst one. Ajora didn't just take $400,000. She took my parents' last act of love and turned it into evidence of their carelessness. For 24 years, when I thought about my mother and father, some small part of me thought, they didn't plan well enough. They left me with nothing. They left me with everything. She spent it. Let me tell you how I finally started to doubt, because it took 24 years and it started with something small. I'm an operations manager now. Boring work in a way, but it made me numerate. I spend my days with budgets and reconciliations, and somewhere in my 30s I developed the specific reflex of a person who works with numbers. When something doesn't reconcile, I get itchy. And one day, at 37, I was doing something completely unrelated, helping a friend understand her father's estate, and she mentioned that as a beneficiary she'd received an annual accounting from the trustee. And I said, "A what?" And she looked at me strangely and said, "An accounting. They have to send you one. The trustee has to tell you what's in the trust and what they did with it. It's the law, Camille. They can't just manage it in secret." I went home and I sat in my kitchen for a very long time, because in 4 years as the beneficiary of a $400,000 trust, I had never seen a single piece of paper. Not one statement, not one accounting, nothing. I had been told a story, verbally, by my aunt, and I had never in my life seen a document. And then I thought about the story itself with my 37-year-old brain instead of my 15-year-old one. The market destroyed it. $400,000 gone in the years when I was 15 through 18. And I thought, what market? What was actually happening in the market during those specific years? Because I could look that up. And a trust for a minor, a conservative, court-supervised trust intended to fund a child's upbringing and education, is not supposed to be in the kind of instruments that go to zero. That's the whole point of a trust for a child. It's supposed to be boring. Properly managed trust for a 14-year-old orphan does not lose everything. It can't, really, without someone doing something wrong on purpose. 24 years, and I had never asked one question. She'd counted on that. Let me tell you about the subplot that made everything possible. A woman named Ifoma Nwasu. There had been lawyers, back when my parents died, a firm that handled the estate and set up the trust. And on a whim, a genuine long shot, I called them, expecting them to be gone, dissolved, retired. They weren't. And the young associate who'd worked on my parents' estate 24 years earlier, a woman named Ifoma, was now a senior partner. And when I explained who I was, there was a pause on the phone, and then Ifoma said something I'll never forget. "Camille Osei, my God, I've thought about you for 20 years. She had. She'd been a first-year associate on the estate, and she remembered it, remembered my parents' careful planning, remembered thinking what a well-provided-for child I'd be. And she remembered that a few years later, she'd heard through the professional grapevine that the trust had been wound down as depleted, and she'd thought, that's strange, and she'd been 26 and junior, and it wasn't her file anymore, and she'd let it go. And it had bothered her quietly for 2 decades. "We keep files," Ifoma said. "Old ones archived. I can't promise anything's still there after 24 years. But Camille, the original trust instrument, the funding schedule, the inventory of assets that went in, if we still have it, then we know exactly what your parents put in that trust, down to the dollar. And that's the starting number. And any trustee has to be able to explain the distance between the starting number and zero. They had the file. I want to tell you what it felt like to hold the funding inventory of my own trust, the list of exactly what my parents had left me, in their own careful arrangement. $412,000 in change. Life insurance, home equity, savings, retirement. Assembled by 2 people who died on a wet road, and had, before they died, made absolutely sure their daughter would be all right. Ajora had told me it was gone. Here it was, in a folder in a firm's basement archive, exactly as my parents had left it. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment I nearly stopped, because I nearly did. I went to Ajora, once, before the accountant, before any of it. I had the funding inventory and a head full of questions, and I'm embarrassed to say this, a hope. A real one, I thought. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe she'll show me the statements. Maybe she'll be relieved to finally explain. She's my aunt. She raised me. I sat in her kitchen and I asked her gently if she had the records from the trust. And Ajora, 70 years old now, still formidable, looked at me and produced the story again, 24 years later, almost word for word. The market, the advisor, the terrible losses, such bad luck. And then she added a new note one she hadn't used when I was 15. And it's the thing that ended my hope. She said, "And frankly, Camille, after everything I did for you, taking you and raising you as my own, I find it hurtful that you'd come here asking questions like an auditor. Is this who you are now?" And there it was, the same lover. 24 years later, she reached for the exact same tool, your gratitude. Be grateful. Don't ask. Asking is a betrayal of the generosity I showed you when I took you in, except I wasn't 15 anymore. And I actually heard it for the first time. She wasn't answering. In 24 years, she had never once answered. She had only ever deflected with a story and then converted my questions into ingratitude. That's not what an innocent trustee does. An innocent trustee says, "Of course, here's the file. I drove home and I hired the forensic accountant that week. Let me tell you what the forensics found, because this is where 24 years of bad luck met arithmetic." His name was Desmond Ape, and he did what forensic accountants do. He started with the known number, the $412,000 funding inventory from IFOMA's archived file, and he followed it. And with a proper legal demand for the trust's records, which a beneficiary is entitled to, the picture assembled itself. There were no catastrophic investment losses. There was no market disaster. The trust hadn't been in aggressive instruments at all. It had been in exactly the boring, conservative things a minor's trust is supposed to be in, and those things had done exactly what boring conservative things do. They'd grown modestly steadily right through the years when Giora was telling a 15-year-old that everything had evaporated. The money hadn't been lost. It had been withdrawn, steadily. For 4 years. In pieces, some of them labeled as beneficiary expenses, which is the part that made me put my head in my hands, because the trust asterisk is allowed to pay for the beneficiary's care and education, and she'd used that legitimate mechanism as her cover story. But Desmond traced where the money actually went, and it did not go to me. It went to Giora's household, her expenses, her life. It paid for her renovation. It paid for her car. And this is the part I still can't say without my voice changing. It paid, substantially, for my cousin's education. My 2 cousins went to school on my dead parents' money, while I signed loan papers at 18 and was told to be grateful for the roof. $412,000, and the market had taken almost none of it. And here's the legal reality, which Desmond and IFOMA walked me through carefully, because I know it's everyone's first question. Yes, it was a long time ago. But a trustee's duty to account doesn't evaporate because time passed, and in cases of concealment, the clock generally doesn't start until the beneficiary discovers, or reasonably could have discovered, the breach. And I had never received an accounting, not one in 24 years. The very fact that she'd never given me a statement was itself the concealment that kept the door open. Her greatest precaution turned out to be the thing that made the case possible. She'd hidden it so completely that the law considered it hidden. Let me tell you about the party. My cousin's engagement party. In Ajora's house, the one my trust renovated. My cousin, who I love and who genuinely does not know, and who is one of the tragedies of this story. And Ajora, holding court, raised her glass and said the sentence that had been the family's official mythology for a quarter century. Family is everything. Whatever we had, we shared. Nobody in this family ever went without. Nobody in this family ever went without. And I set down my drink and I said, "Tia, before you finish that toast, I've spent the last year with a forensic accountant, going through the trust you managed for me, the one you always said the market destroyed." The room went quiet. It wasn't the market. I laid it out. I brought the folder. I'd been carrying it in my bag for 3 weeks waiting to know if I could actually do this. "When my parents died," I said to the room, "they left me $412,000. That's not an estimate. I have the original funding inventory from the law firm that set up the trust. Here it is. My mother and father, the pharmacist and the chemistry teacher, planned carefully the way they did everything and made absolutely sure their daughter would be provided for." I looked at my aunt. "You were the trustee, and starting when I was 15, you told me the market had destroyed it. You told me that for 4 years. You let me go to college on loans I'm still paying at 38. You let me believe, and this is the part I want everyone to understand, that my own parents hadn't planned well enough for me. For 24 years, I thought my mother and father left me with nothing. I put Desmond's report on the table. The trust never lost money in the market. It was invested conservatively the way a minor's trust is required to be, and it grew. Steadily, all 4 years. It was withdrawn, Tia, by you, in pieces, into this household, into your renovation, into your car. I made myself say the last part, and into your children's education. My cousins went to school on my parents' money while I was told there was nothing and signed loan papers at 18. My cousin, the one whose engagement it was, said, "Mum," in a voice I hope I never hear again, and Ajora reached for the only tool she'd ever needed. She drew herself up and she said, "After everything I did for you, I took you in. I gave you a home when you had nobody." "You gave me a home," I said, "and charged me my parents' entire estate for it and never told me the bill, and then you taught me to thank you." I closed the folder. "I have never received a single accounting from you, not one in 24 years. That's not an oversight, Tia. That's the whole scheme. And it turns out, I've had it explained to me by lawyers, that hiding it that completely is exactly what keeps the clock from running out. Here is how it ended. The case was strong, because forensic accounting isn't a story and it doesn't care about anyone's gratitude. A trustee has a legal duty to account for every dollar. Ajor couldn't, because the dollars had gone into her life. Faced with Desmond's reconstruction, IFOMA's archived funding inventory, and the near certainty of a judgment, she settled rather than face a court. I recovered a substantial portion. Not all of it. 24 years is a long time, and much of it is simply gone, absorbed into life. But it was real money, real enough to end my loans in a single afternoon at 38 years old, which is a thing I did alone in my apartment and cried about for an hour. My parents paid off my student loans. 24 years late, from a wet road, from a folder in a basement, but they did it. They'd always meant to. The family fractured as it must. Some relatives could face it. Others found it easier to decide I was ungrateful, because the alternative was admitting they'd watched a child be raised as a charity case in a house her own money was paying for, and never once asked a question. I let those go. I spent 24 years being grateful to people who didn't deserve it. I was finished spending anything on people who preferred the comfortable story. My cousins are the hard part, and the reason this ending is bittersweet. They didn't know. That's the truth. We're children too, and they went to school on stolen money without any idea whose it was. The older one has not spoken to me since, not out of loyalty to her mother, I think, but because she cannot metabolize the fact that her degree was purchased with her orphaned cousin's inheritance. The younger one, the one whose engagement party it was, came to me 3 months later and sat in my kitchen and cried and said, "I keep doing the math, my tuition, your loans. It's the same money, isn't it?" It was the same money the whole time. I told her it wasn't her crime. It isn't. We're rebuilding. It's slow. Ajora and I do not speak. She has never apologized. In her framing, and I hear this secondhand, she raised an orphan and got sued for it, and the world is very cruel to good women. I've stopped needing her to understand. That was the last thing I gave up, and giving it up was its own kind of freedom. Ifoma Enwasu I still send flowers to every year on my parents' anniversary. 26-year-old associate noticed something strange 24 years ago and couldn't do anything about it, and kept it in the back of her mind for 2 decades. And when a stranger called out of nowhere, she said, "I've thought about you for 20 years," and went and found the file. Everything I got back because one young lawyer's discomfort didn't decay. She told me once, "The file was always there, Camille. Somebody just had to ask for it." 24 years and nobody asked, including me, for 24 years. My aunt told me the market destroyed my inheritance, and I believed her, and I built an entire life. The loans, the scarcity, the gratitude, the small, persistent belief that my careful parents had somehow failed me, on top of a lie I never once thought to check. She was smarter than the people who simply deny that the money existed. She never denied it. She just said it was lost, and grief and childhood and a 15-year-old's total ignorance of how trusts work did the rest. The market took it is a beautiful lie because it has no villain. It's nobody's fault. It's just bad luck, and bad luck is unanswerable, and you can't be angry at a market. But money doesn't evaporate. It goes somewhere. It always goes somewhere. And every dollar that ever leaves a trust leaves a footprint, and those footprints sit in files and archives and statements, patient and indifferent, for as long as it takes for someone to finally walk in and ask. I asked at 38. I should have asked at 18. But nobody teaches an orphaned child that the woman feeding her breakfast owes her a legal accounting, and that is precisely what my aunt was counting on. My parents didn't fail me. They planned beautifully. They loved me enough to sit with a lawyer and think about the unthinkable, and they left me $412,000 and a folder in a basement that waited 24 years to tell me the truth. The market never took anything from me. My aunt took it, and then she taught me to say thank you.